Thank you, David, for agreeing to have this dialogue with our students. I want to begin by asking a very fundamental question to you. What was the most important motivation for you when you decided to study law? The reason I want to begin with that question is that for those of us who are not part of this generation, 3 decades ago or so, one of the reasons I was inspired to study law was most leaders of the Indian freedom movement happened to be lawyers. Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer, Sardar Patel was a lawyer, Rajendra Prasad, the first president of India, was a lawyer, Nehru, our first prime minister, was a lawyer, Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constituent Assembly, was a lawyer. So lawyers led the freedom movement, and law essentially also challenged the idea of colonialism and essentially helped India not only become a free country, but also we established the republic as well. So when I look at you and your journey, and especially with students around here, what was your motivation when you decided to study law?
So first, before answering that, I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days. I know it's a busy time of year to be here, and there are many things that are amazing about this university. I have been coming here since 2009, and I've come here almost every year until the pandemic. And every time I come, there's 3 new buildings and 4 new schools, and that's amazing. But the most amazing thing about the school is the students. That's the most amazing thing about any school. People ask what's important about Harvard. I tell my students all the time, it's not the teachers. I mean, we're okay. It's not the buildings, they're not as nice as these buildings. It's the students, it's the peers, it's the people who you get to meet. And I encourage you to never you should do your studies, you should work hard, but get to know your peers and your batchmates, but also across schools. What makes this school so amazing is you live and can take classes with and work with people from all kinds of different disciplines. And that's the most important thing that will help you, not just in your career, but as a person, as a citizen of the world, et cetera. And because it's a global, truly global university, you have a chance to help not only build a better India, but build a better world. So, Raj, I was attracted to law for many of the same reasons that you were. And, the history of my country is also founded by lawyers, 27 of the, 36 or 40 people who signed the Constitution were lawyers. Many of the original people who signed the Declaration of Independence were lawyers. But the difference is that many of those lawyers also were slave owners, and that inequality and racial discrimination were built into the framing documents of our Constitution, including the clause that slaves were counted as 3/5 of a human being in order for purposes of the representation in the legislature. And it took really a second revolution, which was also led by lawyers, most notably a lawyer named Thurgood Marshall, who became one of the most important advocates in the United States, who kind of created what we call the civil rights movement, which became the foundation for the women's rights movement, the LGBTQ plus movement, the disability rights movements. And he was a lawyer. And through a series of legal cases, he challenged the apartheid system in the United States, which was called separate but equal. It was separate but never equal. And eventually in a Supreme Court case called Brown versus Board of Education, he got the Supreme Court of the United States to declare that separate but equal schools were unconstitutional. And why that I think is relevant for all of you is it shows that even law that is created in injustice can be used as a tool of justice. Not always, and as we talked about, if you were at the lecture, a wonderful and challenging question was asked about, isn't the law still a tool of injustice? And it often is. But the law always makes a promise. And the promise, I like to think of our law as carved at the top of our Supreme Court of the United States, which is a very Romanesque, classical building like all courts are. And these words are there. It says equal justice under law. And that was a promise that was made that in the end, people could use to disrupt the inequality in the law. So I grew up with lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and others as kind of heroes. It also was that my father was a lawyer, and that was, I think, it's funny, I would never have said that I became a lawyer because my father was a lawyer like many of you. I probably wanted to do the opposite of whatever my parents told me or were doing. But, those things make an impression. So I think thinking about the promise of law, even unjust law, even law unjustly applied, is something I know that's foundational to the vision that Raj had around this school and can be applied, and those of you who heard the lecture, in any kind of law, no matter what you do. That is, you don't have to be a public interest or a human rights lawyer. If you are a corporate lawyer, you can also think about how to use corporate law to make the world more just, and in a world, frankly, where large corporations are more powerful than governments. I think we need that more than ever.
Thank you so much, David, for reflecting on that very, very foundational question. So one of the big dilemmas I'm sure law professors and law schools seem to have today is that we are at one level conscious of the fact that our students are supposed to be educated in the law, that they need to have faith in the rule of law, they need to have trust on the democratic institutions that the law establishes, and also that they should have faith in the possibility of justice. And that's what we take enormous efforts to bring that point into the classroom and to the lived experiences of our students. But at the same time, we are also living in a society where both domestically and internationally, our students and all of us experience blatant violations of law. Many things that we expect that institutions ought to be doing, they may not necessarily be doing, domestically or internationally. Many aspects of the rule of law that we bring to the classroom may not necessarily be reflected in the society at large. And that happens at the international level, even violations of international law and international human rights law. My question to you is that, what should we be doing so that the young people continue to have faith in the rule of law and are not, let's say, discouraged, disappointed, and even, frustrated and somewhat lose the faith in that elusive aspect of justice that we all are deeply committed to? And what should we be doing as educators and as law schools to address this problem?
I think, like everything else, it starts with being honest about what the situation really is. That is, we should not teach people an idealized vision of the rule of law only to have them constantly be confronted by its failures. On the other hand, we have to teach them that what would a society look like that didn't have a rule of law, or that had no even pretending to commit to it. That is, there's a reason why even the most autocratic societies claim to have a rule of law. And that's because there's a fun, once we don't believe in the divine right of kings anymore, there has to be some basis of organizing society of which we call the rule of law. You can call it many other things, but that is a fundamental principle that all societies know they need, even though they don't actually know society. No society wants to actually live up to all of its requirements. It's just like you study morality. We all understand there has to be morality, and yet no one could claim that they live a totally moral life. Maybe the greatest yogi, but us regular human beings are flawed. And so are societies, and so are institutions. And what we ought to be teaching people is to understand what the purpose of the rule of law is, and how that purpose is constantly being challenged by human frailty, by greed, by power dynamics, by suspicion of the other, of all kinds, and how yet we have to keep pushing back against those things. And that, frankly, even in the darkest times, it's funny, I was talking to somebody after the lecture, that even in the darkest times, we should remind ourselves that there's always been a darker time that we have survived. That, in other words, the challenges that we face, as extreme as they are oftentimes not the worst challenges that have ever been faced. And yet people manage to face them by having the courage to face them. So, that, I think, again, here's a huge advantage that this university, this law school, now located in a great university. When it first started out, it was just a law school. Actually, the first, it was just a gleam in Raj Kumar's eyes, a dream, which required the vision of a Naveen Jindal to support. And then many people who came here when there was no promise that it would succeed at all. The first group of students took a complete leap of faith. So did the first faculty members and administrators who came out here, when Sonipat was actually thought to be like, the other side of the earth from Delhi. Now it's actually, you can't even tell the difference practically. But that too, people have always taken a leap of faith. When Gandhi went on about the salt, he didn't know that it was going to succeed. When Rosa Parks in my country refused to take a seat at the back of the bus, she had no idea what that would happen. So people take a leap of faith, and it's amazing what one person can inspire others to do. And so even in the depths of the challenges, we should always remember that individuals can make a difference, even though they will never fully transform society into a fully just society. There never has been one, and there never will be one.
All right. Now, that's my last question to you, and then we'll open it to students. So, David, you have been a long-term and a long-time believer in India. Even in 2009 and even before, when the world was betting for China, you believed in India. And today we are a country of 1.5 billion people, of which 1 billion are less than 35 years of age. You are not less than 35. I am not less than 35.
But almost double.
All these students here are less than 35. India's life expectancy in 1947, when we became independent, was 32. Today, it is 72. World Bank has estimated that in the next few decades, it will become 82, which essentially means that when most parts of the Western world become older, when most parts of Eastern world, including China and Japan, will become older, India will be younger and will be younger for a longer time. Young Indians, I believe, will be shaping the future of India and the future of the world. In that context, what would you like to tell to these young people who are going to be inheriting a world that is going to be filled with a number of problems, as we know, yet with the kind of education that they would have received, the kind of opportunities that they would have had, and the kind of, let's say, fiercely independent mind that they have developed, what kind of possibilities exist for them as future lawyers?
So as Raj knows, and some of you, I spoke about it a little bit, for the last more than 15 years, I've been studying how globalization has been reshaping legal professions around the world, but in particular in the rising powers of the world. And I started in India, but we also studied Brazil and we also studied China. And in particular, there are many, many comparisons between India and China. And I always have said that India and China were making completely opposite bets on the future. So China was betting you could have capitalism without democracy. And for those of you who study political science and history, that was thought to be impossible. These things were supposed to go together. And yet, for decades, China's economy was the fastest growing economy of the world. I first went to China in 1983, in which, if you've ever been there, I would stand on the Bunt in Shanghai and look across at Prudhomme, and there was nothing but rice paddies and water buffaloes. Now it has the tallest buildings in the world. And so people were saying China is the mode. India was betting that you could have development and capitalism with all due respect, the most insane democracy the world has ever seen, with so many parties, so many ethnic groups, so many languages. The 1 rupee note is translated, how many official languages? Like 12 or something official languages. And yet, I always said, I put my money on India, even when China was outpacing India in many areas of growth. Now, this is one of the areas where I think I have been proved right. If you look at what's happening to China today, and you look at where India is today, I wish I could pick stocks and investments as good as I picked countries. But the real question is, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? And that's going to be up to you. And I think, in other words, this is India's moment. I think the world is finally waking up. I mean, the United States, which basically ignored India, for years. Law schools ignored India. Everybody was studying China. If they were thinking about India, they were either thinking about some outdated, not that there aren't desperately poor people, but that's all people thought was in India, or they were thinking about the history of India, or maybe the formation of the Constitution. But now the world is waking up that India is one of the most important, but not just rising powers, but one of the most important countries of the world. And the symbolism of India hosting the G20, then it goes to Brazil, then it goes to South Africa, is an example of the rise of the rest, as Thomas Friedman said in a famous book. In other words, the world is coming and India is at the forefront of that. But there is no thing that's guaranteed. And this is my first time being back since the pandemic. I was here in 2019 for the 10th year anniversary of this great institution. I was honored to give the convocation speech, but I haven't been back since. I've been following things, but you can't tell unless you come. And there are many challenges at this moment in India. I watch all your election coverage. I watch India Today. I read the English language newspapers. I don't pretend to know, and I'm certainly not here to talk politics. But I am here to say it's obviously a challenging time in which the country both has so much promise, and yet the very things that give it strength, all those people under the age of 35 years old, all of that diversity of culture, of language, of region. I mean, you could travel endlessly in this country and never see the same thing twice. I was in Bangalore, then I was in Mumbai, and I've been in Delhi. I've been in Trivandrum, I've been in Cochin, I've been in each place, and yet I haven't seen but a fraction, of what there is to see in this country, and that gives it strength, but it's also a challenge. And so I guess I want to say to you, your generation has come through, as I said in the lecture, more hardship than any other generation in recent memory, meaning the pandemic, the last experience in which the whole world was suffering from a tragedy that was experienced by everybody was World War II and the Great Depression. And the COVID pandemic, has been felt by all of you, and more so by you and your generation than ours. We were more prepared to deal with it. You weren't. You've seen death. You've seen suffering. You've seen global instability. You're also living in the midst of an incredible technology revolution, which is both exciting and terrifying at the same time, right? You're living in a world that's way more globally integrated. Look at the students, how many countries are represented here in this university, but just think of the music you listen to, the movies you watch, the literature you read, right? It's way more diverse in every sense of the word than the way in which almost everyone in the generations before you grew up. That is a tremendous source of anxiety, but also of strength. And if you can find ways to reach across those differences, to be inspired by and taught by and learn from your peers, as I started out by saying, way more than you have great professors, but it's your peers. And your peers both physically but also virtually around the world. If you could begin to try to harness those ideas, that strength, that creativity, to learn how to disagree in a way that strengthens everyone rather than tears people down, to learn how to embrace the possibilities of technology without surrendering to it. I think there has never been, in some ways, a scarier time to begin your career as a lawyer, and there's never been a more exciting time, because everything is up for grabs in a way that it has not been in 100 years. And the future, as somebody once said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that's what you could do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And that's a great segue to our interactive session with the students. So the floor is open. Please raise your hand and introduce yourself, and then just a very brief introduction of your name, your school, and the year of study, and then shoot your question.
Hello, Professor. My name is Vaishnavi. I'm in my second year of law school. And thank you very much for your great advice. One thing I would like to ask is, I was reading about your interview with Harvard Law today, where you talked about AI and the legal field. In that, I would like to ask, what would be your take on future lawyers studying like a cross-field perspective into programming and coding, or more specifically, as the term is going around these days, a prompt engineer?
First of all, thanks for reading that. Listen, AI is a transformative technology. And by AI, we're packing in a lot of different kinds of things, large language models, machine learning. Now there is, text to video, text to digital. Right here in India is the most exciting place, by the way, for that technology. So NVIDIA just put out the fastest chip in the world that's going to absolutely be transformative. And this is just one of many, many innovations. So one is, you're absolutely now at the epicenter. Of course, there's Silicon Valley and there are other places, but I think if you look at who's driving this change, it's people in India, and NRIs, as you would say, India's living outside of India. There's a huge opportunity here. Okay, first thing. Second thing is, I think everyone needs to learn how to understand and use these technologies, but everyone does not have to learn how to actually create them or how they work in any detail, okay? I mean, all of you have, these things in your pocket. How many people actually know how to program one or how to, but here's what you need to know. What information is it collecting on you? What are the limitations of what you could use it for and what you could trust it for? Same thing with AI. Some people are going to become prompt engineers par excellence, but everybody ought to understand what are the risks, what are the benefits of the technology, but what are the risks? Right now, the thing about large language models is no matter how much they appear to be thinking, they are not thinking. They're simply predicting the next word based on scanning, millions and millions and hundreds of millions of other documents. And it's incredibly useful, but it's not a substitute for judgment, analysis, empathy. So how to use it and what can it be used for? Last thing I'll say is, somebody once said, he said, everybody's worried about, computers thinking like humans. He said, I'm not worried about computers thinking like humans. I'm worried about humans thinking like computers. And don't forget, that's the human element. That's why liberal arts is critically important. We were with a group of incredibly fancy lawyers doing interviews around NLS Bangalore. These were partners at Amarchan and actually Cyril Amarchan and Shardul Amarchan and Ketan and all that. And they said, what do they wish they knew more and what was being taught more? Liberal arts, humanities, psychology, sociology, because they realize that law still is a human profession done by human beings about human problems. And that's what we need to integrate when it comes to technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you know that we are a very interdisciplinary university, not only from the standpoint of the law school itself, but all our students, including in the law school, have opportunities to take courses across the 11 schools, other schools of the university. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Professor. I'm Shivam. I'm a fourth-year law student. And I had sort of two questions, if that is permitted. Okay, so the first one was, and it's been a year and some since I last did jurisprudence, but one of the most important questions in jurisprudence is the normativity of the law. In as much as why should we follow the law? Because law has this sort of monopoly over geographies, right? We are in the state of Haryana right now. You cannot follow the law of Massachusetts and I cannot follow the law of my home state of Uttar Pradesh. So why should we follow the law? Different scholars have different opinions. Dworkin said that it's the integrity. Hart said it's the internal morality. And Kelson was it's just you should follow one law because it is authorized by another law, and that is authorized by another law until you reach a state of presupposition. So my question to you is as to why should we follow the law according to you?
You mistake me for a political philosopher. You already sound like you know political philosophy more than me. So I think there are many answers to this question, but in a way, I think there is no answer to this question. It's a little bit like a story that my colleague Martha Minow, who was also one of his professors, tells, in which, whether it's a real or a mythical society, in which people believed that the world rested on the back of a giant turtle. And then somebody asked, but what does the turtle rest on? And they said, an even bigger turtle. And somebody said, what does that turtle say? Even bigger turtle. And then eventually the person said, it's turtles all the way down. It's faith and belief all the way down. I mean, I think Gone are the days at which we thought of law as an independent, autonomous discipline that was created out of pure logic. I don't believe in that. Ever since legal realism, most people don't believe in that. I don't believe, although I think economics is very useful, I do not believe that law can be reduced to economics. In other words, that law is simply just about, Pareto optimism and efficiency, since the very definition of what counts as efficiency is itself a contested thing. So then people say it's all politics. But the minute we say law is all politics and the same as politics, then there is no law. Because politics at the end is either about who has the majority votes, or who has the most money, or just the divine right of kings. I personally, I'm a religious person, but I do not believe that the law has been handed down on Mount Sinai tablets or whatever your particular faith is. So then law is about our ability to try to govern ourselves in a way that is as respectful to human dignity as we can manage. And that will, as I said before, inevitably be flawed, subject to contestation. In answer to Raj, your first question, you should be teaching people to challenge whether, not only what the law is, but whether the law is just, and whether it, in fact, one of the most important questions, as you've undoubtedly studied in jurisprudence, is when is it right to disobey the law? And the answer is sometimes it is right to disobey the law. I don't know how many of you have been to Germany. One of the most compelling things in Germany, if you go to Berlin, is you can go, there's a museum called the Topography of Terror, and it's built on the old Gestapo SS headquarters. It's the one building they never reconstructed. It's still kind of a bombed out shell. It's a very simple museum. You kind of walk around and you look at pictures and documents and exhibits that tell the history of the rise of the Nazis and their rule. And two things to me struck me that have stayed with me. I went there 30 years ago probably. One is how young the Nazis were. We always think about them because we see the pictures of them in the 40s and World War II, but they took over in the 30s. They were young. They were not much older than you. They were in their 30s. So the idea that young people will inevitably be just is, not true. The second, though, thing to answer your question is almost everything the Nazis did, the first thing they did was pass a law to make it legal, to confiscate people's property, to put Jews in ghettos. They were, because Germans had created it was the greatest legal system in the world. The greatest legal minds in the world were German philosophers. And so sometimes the answer is you should disobey the law. How you disobey the law, when do you do it? Complicated, difficult questions. But I guess my sense is, although I love academic philosophy, I do not think, in the end, I think it's turtles all the way down, and we're the turtles.
I'm Ronit. I'm in my third year of law school. I had a question to you, Professor, based on what you were saying when you were talking to Professor Raj. You said that when everyone else was backing China to be the golden duck, to so call it, you chose India. I want to know, Professor, what specifically made you choose India? Because China definitely was the most favorite back then. Mm-hmm. What was that one point that made you feel like India would be the better, or would rise up above China?
If I had to put one word on it, it was a little bit what I said. India, for all of its many, many challenges in doing so, is the largest democracy in the world. And it's an incredibly vibrant democracy, full of incredibly vibrant and opinionated people. As Amartya Sen wrote many years ago, this book, The Argumentative Indian. I love this idea, but that's a virtue, right? Because it turns out the minute we put decision-making solely in the hands of a small, self-perpetuating group of people, then eventually innovation will die. Because inevitably, back to the question he asked me, you need people to challenge and say, why is that the law? Or I don't even believe that's the law. Or should that be the law, right? And in China, first, what Deng Xiaoping's genius was, is that he unleashed the brilliant entrepreneurial spirit of the Chinese. I mean, listen, you go all the rest of the way around the world, and all the Chinese were imported to be workers and, you know, sometimes slaves to build the railroads, and they all end up being the people who run the businesses. And why? Because they have an incredible entrepreneurial spirit. Deng Xiaoping unleashed that in China. He also, and in the first 20 years, what did China try to build? A rule of law society. They built courts. They built law schools. They built law firms, right? You know, my favorite thing when I was studying is, you know, they built law firms to try to look like the great law firms of the West. So for a long time, the biggest and most important law firm in China was called King and Wood. Okay, here's a hint. There was no Mr. King and there was no Mr. Wood, and there never was. But he named it King and Wood because it sounded like Slaughter and May or you know, March on Mangaldas or Sullivan and Cromwell or whatever, right? Because they wanted that idea, and they built great universities. They did international exchange programs. They sent their students here. And those things were the things that created the dynamism of the Chinese economy. But here's the problem. The more you unleash dynamism, the more you unleash people to think for themselves, guess what they start doing? They start asking questions. Like, how come those people get to run everything? And how come they get to have a pilot? And how come, and why don't we get to vote on that? And I don't agree with that. And it's very hard to maintain a one-party state. And so what starts happening? Now we start cracking down. Now we start, I have many, many friends in China. And when Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang came in as the leadership duo, there was tremendous optimism. I was in China at the time doing research of this book. People thought it's a new generation. You know, we finally have young people like us who've kind of grown up in the modern world. We're going to take this to the new level. We're going to continue to open, to liberalize. And as we've seen, it's been exactly the opposite. And what's happened? The COVID, it was hard enough on COVID here. COVID was a disaster there. The economy is not only not growing, and by most people's estimation is shrinking. The number of Chinese students, they all used to want to be educated and then come back. The number of people who don't want to come back. Whereas now people who were, the brain drain in India is moving in the other direction because people see there's opportunity here, there's growth. And again, what I say is, but you can't take that for granted. It has to be a place that everyone feels that they have the opportunity to succeed, to share, to build the nation. And if you do that, I think the opportunity for India, as Raj says, in the next half century are unlimited.
Thank you so much for that. Let's take some questions from that side.
My name is Amber Rana and I am in my third year. My question is that how can the challenge of curbing misinformation, which is at the intersection of artificial intelligence and free speech, be addressed?
This is going to be one of the greatest challenges of your time, because pretty soon they're already, I mean, you've seen, you know, there are already these deep fakes, but now people who are pretty good can, you know, they're kind of a little jerky, then pretty soon you're not going to, there's like, you're not going to be able to tell at all. And in the lecture, I presented some evidence, not from me, but from something called the Edelman Trust Institute, which measures global trust around the world. They do these it's free. If you just go to their website, you can find all this stuff. And they do these surveys around what are trust in various kinds of institutions. And the media, over time, has just been sinking lower and lower. And then they did they show country by country what people's fear of misinformation or distrust of the media is. And, they do it as a kind of bar graph from the worst to the, and India is like fourth from the worst. Like 82% of the people do not trust the information that they receive in the media. And social media has only made this worse. The echo chamber, these are incredibly difficult issues. I do not think there's, of course, any simple answer, except maybe this, that people have, like you, have to make a commitment to not just accept the first thing that you see, to try to find independent sources of verification, not just to read or go to the websites or go on social media of the people who you already know you agree with, not only to talk to the people you already know you agree with, but to try as best you can to understand different perspectives and get different sources of information. And then, people ask me, I travel a lot. I was just in Brazil 2 weeks ago. I was in Europe a month before that. I'm going to Singapore in a few months. People say, why do you travel so much? I mean, now you can go on the internet. We could have meetings by Zoom and all that. And I always say, if you want to know, you have to go. You have to eat with people. You have to see what they see. You have to have the smell of the place, the feel of the place, the look of the place. And I still don't pretend at all that I understand, but the more I go and the more people like you talk to me, the better my chance is of actually not just reading what they say about India in the newspaper, but saying, well, wow, I was there and it didn't feel like that to me. And that's the beginning, I think, but it's one of the biggest problems of our time.
Absolutely. And I think it's not even so much about, even before AI, we see this idea of misinformation and fake news. The AI is going to just weaponize it and making it even more difficult. All right, let's take some more questions. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I'm Reva Makhija. I'm a third-year law student. And essentially, my question to you is that I'm currently working on a project relating to legal pragmatism, which essentially argues in favor of judge-made law, and it is against a grand theory or the over-reliance on statutory or codified law. So my question to you basically is that in light of the rapid changes to the circumstances and situations and the emergence of AI or sustainability concerns, as you had referred to before, do you think that there is a greater relevance to judicial pragmatism today, and since it is more context sensitive, and whether there should be a straying away of codified law in as much as its relevance in the world today, do you think?
I think all law is always going to be playing catch up to the developments in technology. And of course, since the legislative process moves more slowly, and legislators tend to be even more removed from the day-to-day of the world. I never will forget the first time that they hauled all the heads of the social media companies like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and a bunch of them in front of Congress. And the senators were asking Zuckerberg, well, why is Facebook so important? I mean, isn't that just a site for sharing pictures? Okay, they had no idea that it was the largest advertising site in the world, that what they were selling was digital footprint, et cetera. They had no idea, right? Because the average age of the senators was probably 75, right? And, they had heard of Facebook because their grandchildren had told them about it. On the other hand, judges are not so much better. I think, listen, we'll need to be, And yet, we'll need all forms of law to work, but to recognize what the limitations are. So the problem with judge-made law is that oftentimes it will apply in this case, but might not necessarily apply in that case. And some of the things, we do need uniform laws. On the other hand, every uniform law has to be interpreted. This is why I think the old debate between the civil and the common law, where it used to be thought of as being kind of polar opposite ways of thinking, now, you know, there's much more common law in the civil law system and much more civil law, much more statutory law. We didn't used to teach statutory law in Harvard Law School in the first year, and then people realized, well, that most of half the law people had was statutory. So I say this to say all forms of formal law, but private ordering and private ways of understanding conduct in law will always be ahead of where the formal structures are. And it's partly why, for me, I'm interested, as I said in the lecture, in what the role of business is, because business is making these decisions on the fly. And guess who's at the center of many of these decisions? It's lawyers. And so what are the lawyers going to say about how the business is going to be deploying these new technologies? And will you bring not the law, but the principles, but the ideals of what society should be, what the law should be, what the impact should be to these day-to-day decisions is going to be every bit as important as the formal law.
Thank you very much for that.
I'm Karan, and I'm from the BBLLB program, and I'm in the third year. So, I mean, like you mentioned that, you know, over the past few decades, India has shown immense potential for growth, and it's got a bright future ahead. So, I mean, considering the legal professions, and let's say in the context of law schools, what is something that maybe a law school like Harvard could learn from India or Indian law schools?
We don't have facilities that are as nice as yours. We don't have a student body that's nearly as global as yours. We don't have an integrated program that's nearly as integrated across disciplines. Students don't live together. The law students live in one place, the business school students live in the other. Some of you have been there. The undergraduates are different. It's hard to cross-register to take courses. You know, and if you ask where innovation is going to come from, it's not going to come from the most established, most well-resourced countries or institutions. In fact, I haven't learned many Hindi words, but my absolute favorite Hindi word and the concept that I think describes what India can teach to the world is jugaad. Because in fact, today in a world in which we have to make do, in a world in which it's turtles all the way down, in which we can't figure out whether we can trust what we, you know, see with our own eyes, in a world in which new problems are coming up all the time, we have to improvise. And Indians are brilliant at making a way out of no way. So I would say I will try to take the spirit of jugaad back to Harvard Law School.
Hello, Professor.
Thank you.
My name is Akriti. I'm a fifth-year law student at Jindal. So I think my question is a bit led. So at Jindal, we have a wonderful program called Professional Ethics. In it, we did one of your papers, which is about law students and lawyers and legal ethics as a whole. I'm intrigued by one example you put forth, and I just wanted your thoughts on it. About you talked about Oliver Munjan as a black law student and then transforming into someone who was discriminated against in a law firm, and the sanitization of law firms giving rise to him not being prepared for, you know, discrimination in the real world. I do think at Jindal we have a program where, you know, it's aware enough to combat understanding the law in that sense and understanding the world around us as professionals. But, you know, I'm going to be a corporate lawyer in a few months. And I think one thing that's a dissonance for me is getting out of such a great environment that's exposed me to so much and now stepping into a world that might not necessarily be that anymore. What is advice you have for law students on that front? And a second thing is, as a corporate lawyer, you mentioned to Professor Raj also that we can also kind of step in and take social change. But I mean, a personal example is I wrote a paper talking about why ESG is just lip service with one of my professors. And when I went to the law firm, one of my first assignments was, oh, greenwashing is good. I mean, you know, so how do we survive that dissonance? Because it's my job and I have to do it. But I've been taught better.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for reading anything that I wrote. You know, when you write these things and you send them out in the world, you never know that anybody will read them, let alone a bright young student like you from India. So maybe to put the two parts of your question together, and it goes to what I say is both the promise but also the challenge of India. It's an incredibly diverse country in every sense of the world, and yet we know, just like my country, that there's a lot of diversity at the entry level, but when we go up and we look at the powerful leadership positions, they tend to look like they did 25 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe 150 years ago. And one of the things I think that a great law school like this should do is to both teach people about the history of how these things came to be, that it wasn't just the natural order of things, that they came about because of decisions that were made, of who was included, who was excluded, how the organizations were formed, but also to teach people about how organizations like law firms work. So I've written a ton about trying to demystify the way in which law firms work. And it's not to say that they're evil institutions, it's just to say they work as profit maximizing businesses. And now, so that leads to the second part, which is I remind my students all the time that, you know, law firms, you know, Ketan and Company, my friend Cyril, Nora Marchand, or whatever, these are not social welfare organizations. They should do social welfare, but they are not social welfare organizations. They exist to provide legal services to clients who pay their fees. They're, you know, just like any other business in a market. And therefore, there will always be dissonance between, you know, how you might wish an organization to behave or a problem to be solved and what the client wants. To be a lawyer is to represent others. That is one of the challenges. And by the way, don't think you get away with it from this if you're a public interest lawyer, because your public interest clients may have different views than you, and your job is to represent them. This happens all the time. There's a whole literature about the conflicts of interest and the difficulties in public interest law or government. You go to serve the government, to serve the nation, but the political situation in the government may be different than the one that you yourself would like. And yet there's still the opportunity to do good in all of these places. How you do it depends in part on where you are in the organization. So your first year, you cannot come in and expect to set the policies of the organization. On the other hand, there's a reason why they recruited you. Never underestimate your own power to, to change. Because people, you're one of the most desirable, all of you, law students in the country and the world. And law is a human capital business based on talent. And so if you ask, for example, why is there a pro bono policy in these law firms? Why do they doing corporate social responsibility? It's because they know that if they don't do these things, they won't get the top talent. They're not going to do it all the time. You're not going there only to do pro bono work, but you should take advantage of that. And if you're not getting what you want, or if the dissonance gets too large, then you have to respect yourself enough to say, this is not for me. I always say, whenever you take any job, whatever that job is, as you take it, you should ask yourself, and this is a music reference from country and western music, is a music form in the United States. Many of you have heard it. There's a famous country western singer named Johnny Paycheck. He's now long gone, but this was back in the 60s and 70s. And his favorite, I always say everybody should think, what's your Johnny Paycheck moment? What do I mean by that? His most famous song was called Take This Job and Shove It. So when you take a job, you need to ask yourself, if they ask me to do this, when is it that I will say no? I'm not saying no one will do it. I'm just saying I'm not going to do it because it's too opposed to my principles, to my values. Now, the reason why I say you have to take that the day you take the job is that when that moment comes, and you've been there 5 years and you're looking to be a partner and you've already bought, you've bought a house and now you're paying a mortgage or, all the other things that come along, it'll be maybe hard to see that. And you have to remind yourself that there's nothing more important than my integrity. Now, I'm not saying everything is worth quitting for. And you are going to make compromises. Life is full of compromises. I don't know if anybody's married yet, but when you do, you will realize there are compromises, okay? You're not going to get your way all the time. You're going to have to do things but some things shouldn't be compromised. And how you make those decisions is one of the most important things. And the last piece is, that's why your friends and your cohort are important. So now you can call up somebody who's at another firm and say, did anybody ever ask you to do that? Or call up one of your friends who's doing a different kind of practice and say, how can I think about maybe I need to make a move? Where do I want to make a move, right? That's why the cohort is the most important thing.
And I would just add that could just be your Sonipat moment. And you will say that, what, enough is enough. I need to get back to Sonipat.
My name is Rohan. I'm a third-year law student. So partly because of some kind of fear that with all the technological changes, my job prospects are reduced, I decided to take Harvard University's CS50 course, which was like
you did.
free computer science course. But I'd always wondered why the law school at Harvard never offered any similar courses, because I saw courses from all the different branches or many of the different subjects that are taught at Harvard, but I never ended up seeing a free law course on any of your websites.
Yeah, no, that we've been very behind on thinking about distance learning, virtual learning. The law school, this is actually, I think, a huge limitation on where the law school is. I think there's definitely discussion around it, but I think a couple of things. One is, again, this goes to the question you asked me about what can be learned from India. The traditional, the more traditional and the more successful you are, the less you feel you have to change. And frankly, there is a value that I think many people in my law school would say to having people come to a residential program. I mean, there's a reason why you're not teaching, and I don't think, no matter how much distance learning there is, I think there will still be the value of being there, that, and in large measure that has to do with the relationships that I was talking about. But I do think that the law school should be much more engaged in providing content of various kinds. And the business school is ahead, the CS50. We now have our students taking CS50 online. So, I mean, and we're at Harvard, right? So I think one of the real interesting questions that all of you should be asking is, how will education be delivered in the future, not just to people who are now your age, 18 to 25 or whatever, but lifelong learning? Because your learning, that's another reason of living in a VUCA world, is it's not going to stop simply because you've graduated. In fact, that's the beginning of your learning process. Some of it will be on the job, as we were talking about, but you want to keep learning and expanding your mind. So the law school is beginning. There are some courses that people have online. I haven't actually personally done one. There's a contracts course that's online. There's something called Copyright X, which is a kind of combination of online at Harvard plus coordinated curriculum in other classes. I know there's a course that people are putting together around kind of business law and financial literacy in the law. How many of these will be offered for free and how many of these you will have to pay for? That's a lot of, again, part of what law schools are looking for. And just to be blunt, I just spent 4 days thinking about NLS Bangalore and what it's going to do and how it's going to pay for itself, where the fees are much lower than they are here. And frankly, raising student tuition fees is a zero-sum game at some point. It's pricing people out of the market. It's making things less accessible. So people are looking for alternative revenue streams, one of which is online learning, right? And so I think you're going to see a mix of free and for-profit online learning in various things. But all I can say to you is I agree that we ought to be thinking much more about this in the future.
All right, so we've come to the end of this fascinating.
I think we have
one
more
question.
person.
All right.
My name is Sehaj and I am in my second year for the 3-year LLB program at Jindal. We today spoke about a lot of things like how the future is impacting AI, and we even spoke about judge-made laws, which got me thinking about the aspect of judicial discretion and how that plays such a pivotal role in judgments. So I have been wondering about this because my interests include AI and law, that do you think that AI or machines or robots can ever replace judges? Because one of the critiques of judicial discretion is the inherent bias that they bring in. Do you see that anywhere in the future we could have maybe robots as judges giving judgments, and whether it's scary, whether it's dangerous, or could it benefit us? I'm just wondering about the implications of that.
I will say I had lunch with some of your professors and saw some of them after the lecture. By the way, the dining facilities here, talk about another thing, are way better than what you get at Harvard. The only challenge is the beauty of India and the problem of India is they feed you everywhere, every time. You'd be in the middle of the meeting. We were in the middle of the meeting at the Karnataka High Court. And I'm talking to these judges, and all of a sudden, like, 10 waiters appear, and then we start having snacks. And, you know, when we think snacks, we think, I don't know, popcorn or... No, it's a whole bowls full of, right? And anyway, it's beautiful, but you have to go to the gym every day, which is why you're building a world-class sports facility here. You know, first, there's already robot judges. I mean, by robot, if we mean by that artificial intelligence, I don't know anybody done anything on eBay, bought or sold anything. eBay resolves millions of disputes a year, almost completely without the intervention of human beings. There's AI. In other words, I said, I ordered a Jindal scarf from you, vintage, from the first year, and you say you sent it, but I never got it, and then I make a complaint, and millions of those disputes are already resolved this way. There is now, we have a provision, actually you have this provision, because I do watch your news, the question of who gets bail. And again, we're not talking politics, but there's a big case going on here about whether when you refile charges, it means that you guys know this better than me, whether bail then gets postponed and the trial gate. Well, we have this same system, only we have a system of cash bail. And who has to pay bail and whether they're eligible is supposed to be determined by not whether you're guilty or not, because that hasn't been determined yet, but it's about whether or not you pose a risk of either not showing up for the hearing when it's scheduled or committing another offense before the hearing is scheduled. So it's about your risk of flight and your dangerousness. Those decisions are notoriously biased. So when people do studies, they show that if you are from a white middle-class male, you are much more likely to get bail than if you are from a black lower-class neighborhood, even for exactly the same offense. So then people said, we should have an algorithm that will take the bias out. And there are private companies that develop these algorithms that are now being used by judges to determine whether someone is likely to be a flight risk to show up at their hearing or commit another crime. How are those algorithms being made? They're being trained on all the past decisions and whether or not somebody who was let out on bail actually showed up at their hearing and whether they committed a crime. Only, what do we know about all those past decisions? They were biased, okay? Garbage in, garbage out. So in other words, it's very hard to eliminate bias. And the worst thing was these were private AI companies, and when the defendants challenged them to say the algorithms were biased, please tell us how they made the decision, the company said the algorithms are proprietary and we can't tell you how they work. Now, this has now become a huge controversy, but the answer is, are we going to use AI in judging? Absolutely. Are judges themselves going to use it? Absolutely. But this goes to the question we were talking about before, about what it's not that you need to know how to program. You don't have to have had taken CS50, but you better understand the way in which algorithms are trained and how that may reproduce existing biases. Now, here's another thing. Don't let the lawyers off the hook. You know what's the most, I think people are investing huge amounts of money in? Predictive analytics, in which they're trying to predict what, not only which judge is more likely to render a decision in which way, but what language you will give the judge that will make the judge more likely to rule in your favor. Whether you're having your case before or after lunch. There's actually surveys that say judges get crankier in the hour before lunch and sleepy in the hour after lunch. And you may get So is this all going to be out there? Are you going to be able to ban it? France tried to say it's unethical for lawyers to use predictive analytics to predict the judges. That's the same way as high schools saying don't use AI for your homework. Everybody's using AI for their homework. So here's the question we have to ask ourselves. We need to understand enough to say what analytics, what artificial intelligence will be good for and what are its limitations. There are so many cases in the Indian courts. How many cases filed every year, Raj? A million?
We have we have 5 crores, 50 million cases pending in India.
50 million cases, okay? 5 years or 10 years to decide a case. Even if the AI is only 75% as good as a human being and it can do it in 30 days, that actually might be an acceptable trade-off, right? How do we think about what the trade-offs are between what technology can bring us and its limitations compared to actual human beings? I hear lawyers say all the time, oh, we can't use any piece of legal technology unless it's 99% accurate because, we have the highest standards of quality. I said, oh, really? So in other words, like document review or AI to pick out relevant documents for a case. I said, did you test the accuracy of bleary-eyed associates reading through boxes of documents in a windowless warehouse in Haryana in August? Did you test their accuracy to the 99th percentile? So we cannot imagine, in other words, a perfect human decision maker as the actual basis against which we're testing technology, right? So the answer is, it's coming, but we better figure out what we think about it, and I'm depending on smart people like you to help us figure out how to use it.
Thank you so much, David, and of course I share his opinion on that. You know, some time ago, we were asked, what do we fear more, whether robots performing open heart surgeries or robots deciding as judges, we might end up saying that, you know what, we'll be fearful of the robotic surgeries. But listen, robotic surgeries are happening in India as well. And so it's more a question of how evolved that technology will be and how humans can engage with it. We've come to the end of this fascinating interview discussion. One last question to you, David. David, you were here on 7th August 2009, and you have been here since then many times. Now you're here with us as the university marks its 15th anniversary. You believed in this institution long before the world did. What would you like to share with the students and the faculty, not just the ones who are here, but those who are not here, who will hear this in terms of your journey, but also your own reflections on the past, the present, and the future as far as OP Jindal Global University and the Jindal Global Law School are concerned?
When Raj first came to me and told me that he had this idea, this was 2008, and said he was going to create a new law school from the ground up, I told him, that's very exciting. The first thing you need is money. He said, well, you know, there's this wonderful man named Jindal who wants to name it in honor of his father, and he's given me 100 million. I thought he meant rupees, and then he said, no, dollars. And I said, that's incredible. First of all, what an incredible act of philanthropy and generosity in a country where there was no tradition of that, particularly in education. And I hope this is said, and I hope Naveen has been here and you give him his thanks, because he's poured his heart and soul in it, and he's done something even more extraordinary, which is he's allowed Raj to run it as a fully independent university and not as his personal plaything, which, you know, could easily have happened. But even with that, I thought it would take him 5 years to be able to even begin to think about opening its doors. He said, no, in 1 year we'll be open. And sure enough, I was here in August of 2009, where there was already a building and at least one room we could go in the building. We have pictures of ourselves in that building, that one room. Yeah, the Big Bang, which is appropriate, right? Because from that came the universe. But even then, which I found remarkable, if you had told me today that this would be even a tenth of what it is, I wouldn't have believed it. And if it had been a tenth of what it is, it would have been an incredibly impressive accomplishment. When we were here in 2017 for the book launch, or maybe it was 2018, when we published this book called The Indian Legal Profession in the Age of Globalization, I brought my team with me. And my collaborator and executive director named Brian Fong, I told him about it, we talked about it, and he walked around the campus, which again in 2018 was maybe only 40 or 50% or 60% of what we see today. He said, oh my God, this is beautiful. This is like Amherst or Princeton. He was just blown away. What has been accomplished here is truly remarkable. But as I said before, it's only the beginning. And it's the beginning in two important ways. One is obviously Raj has many more plans to expand and to make the university greater. But it's the beginning for all of you on the real product of this university. It's not buildings, it's not books and articles at the library, it's not programs, it's not faculty, it's you. And in a way, the real proof of the pudding of this university will be what you do with your lives and careers. And having had the chance to interact with you today And over the course of many years, I couldn't be more excited about what the future is going to hold. The questions you have asked today in the big lecture we did, in the times that I've come before, are as good or better than any questions that I'm asked any place in the world I go, and I do a lot of lectures and speaking around the world. And the possibility of India is just immense, but you have to grab it. And you have to each do your own part. You can't be responsible for everything. 1.5 billion people, so much area, so many states, so many problems. But if you look at it that way, it becomes overwhelming. But if you just ask, what can I do in my life to make the world a better place? How can I reach out to someone else to give them opportunity that hasn't been there before? How can I take one small step on some issue, whether it's AI or courts or misinformation or politics or human rights or democracy or improving economic performance of great institutions and creating more jobs and making sure that it's not all greenwashing, even if it's sort of some greenwashing, but to hold people accountable in whatever way we can. If every one of you do that, then I have no doubt that the promise of this university will just continue to grow as you continue to grow and thrive in your lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And before I close, I just want to say that what David has outlined today for us, both in the lecture and also in this interactive session, I gather at least 5 important lessons from what he said. First, I think for all the students here, remain focused in what you can do when it comes to making a difference. I've always believed that changing the world through law and justice is what motivated many of us to come into law. And each one of you, in whichever walk of life and law, be it in the corporate areas or outside, remember that you have immense possibilities to make a difference. The second, which I think, David, the undercurrent of many things that he said, is also about the fact that you are all privileged when it comes to receiving education. One of the things that I shudder to think is that UNESCO has estimated that during the pandemic, 1.5 billion young people were removed out of education. But students at Harvard and Jindal received uninterrupted education because we were able to use technology. We were privileged, you were privileged, we could access that, and we continued the educational project. So with that privilege comes responsibility. The third is something that not to be afraid of the future. And I think one of the things new technologies, including AI, does is that while it challenges the role of what lawyers and human beings do, it also is in many ways expects us to elevate our own capabilities to address the problems that are going to come with it. And that also takes back the first point, which is that use your important years in the university to have a rigorous, intellectually engaging, comprehensive, holistic, interdisciplinary education, because that educational foundation will keep you in good stead as you address the big problems of the future. The fourth, I think, which David said, is that in many ways, pursue your calling, because you are going to be in a situation where you will be many more opportunities will come your way, but then ask a question to yourself as whether this is what you really want to do. And when you find that answer that you don't want to do something, don't live somebody else's life, it's absolutely important for you to pursue your own calling. I was so privileged to receive fantastic education in many institutions, including one of my alma mater, which is Harvard. And one of the things I saw there was there were people who come from different backgrounds, but then the institution also provided opportunities for people to fulfill their dreams and aspirations. And so, and I can only hope that this opportunity for you to be here will enable you to do that. And the last bit is that the privileged education that you receive also expects you to be contributing to social change and in many ways making the world a better place. That can mean many things. It can very well mean that being in a law firm or an investment bank or a consulting firm, you are slowly pushing ideas of sustainability, fairness, justice, CSR, and things like that. It could be being a litigating lawyer. It could be meaning being a judge. It could also be working for an NGO or a think tank or a research institution. It could be meaning to be an academic. But remember that all of us who receive education have a responsibility to make a difference to the future and the world that we inhabit. So with those words, I want to say thank you to all of you for participating in this conversation. I am deeply grateful to my friend and mentor, Professor David Wilkins. I must tell you that for the last 1 week, he has been waking up at 4 a.m. and continuously working as a part of the review commission that he is part of, set up by the Honorable Chief Justice of India for the National Law School, Bangalore. And they've been traveling across Bengaluru and Mumbai, and then last few days in Delhi. But as David has been a very generous man, he made it a point to spend the entire day today with us on campus. And tomorrow, Harvard Law School Center and Jindal are hosting a G20 conclave focusing on ESG at our Delhi facility at Taj. So thank you so much, David, for your time and for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.